My name is P.K. Langshaw. I would like you to very quickly visualize an animal or bird that you love, perhaps a companion species or therapy animal, one that you have lived with, romanticized, or one that has worked for you. Now think of a second animal, one you are afraid of, a pest, bothersome, and again, one you have experienced, perceived, or studied. Now please hold on to those. How might disruption or the act of circumventing the norm or destabilizing the familiar be a key factor for envisioning compelling new living cycles? And what might designing beyond the human-centric view change in radical and positive ways our individual and collective patterns of being and behaving in this world? We would move away from human isolation and design our homes and communities to become convergent for all inhabitants, habitats, and habits, and would understand the deep connections with and the critical interdependence on other species, because truly sustainable frameworks and ideas honor biodiversity and ecological resilience. Rather than trying to control nature, we create mutually beneficial systems where we are responsive and responsible participants. Why? Because it is increasingly evident that we are colliding with other species in precarious and unsustainable ways. Disruption also demands embracing the personal, or the experience, the poetic as creative thought, and the political where the individual is bound to society. And for me, these work in complement with my academic research in design for the built environment. Philippa is my first name, which means lover of horses, and my first choice animal. I remember moving through the dense forest and up steep inclines at Lake Louise. We were tracking a bear who had been seen near tourist areas. My mare's head cocked, ears stiff, pointed, nostrils flared, tense muscles, eyes widened. I couldn't see through the woods, nor identify the variant sounds of rustling leaves, so I surrendered to the horse's embodied and acute sensing of the land. She was teaching me how to be within nature, and although it has been many, many years since that time, it remains one of my most magical and visceral memories. One event, one horse has stirred a lifelong respect for all horses. And these profound moments are described by the late environmentalist David Fleming as encountering another being when the muntjac deer he was studying turned towards him and met his gaze. And whether, in the 1970s, reports showed that highways through Banff National Park endangered animal populations by subdividing species into vulnerable fractions and interrupting migratory patterns necessary for food sourcing, healthy breeding, and sheltering. Roadway accidents and earned injury cost billions in insurance claims, so it became clear humans needed their migratory paths, but so did animals. And whether intentional or not, wildlife crossings became the precursor to designing beyond the human-centric view, with 88 underpasses, overpasses, accommodating large and small creatures, elks, deer, cougars, and so on. There has been a dramatic decrease in roadkill and human death. The passes have created living science laboratories and observation stations for us to view the wild from non-intrusive distances. Animal pathways have been effective throughout the world, with the Netherlands constructing in the most provocative way a sunken pedestrian bridge for migratory humans so as not to disturb the surrounding aquatic residents. Now, closer to our own urban spaces, I tell the story of my second animal or pest creature. Away from the noise and congestion of the city center, I bought a property with twice as much land as it did living space. But here is where I wanted to design my English garden, with rocks, trees, flowers, and peace and quiet. Well, that is until I was rudely interrupted by the cacophony of loud, eerie, and irritating calls. And if you know Alfred Hitchcock's The Bird, a flock of seagulls or a murder of crows will trigger upsetting movie memories, and they loved my cherry tree far too greedily. So I began investigating the corvid for their weakness and how to be rid of them. Oh my God. Mythical creature, superior intelligence, facial recognition, important seed spreader, capable of complex missions such as dropping walnuts at Tokyo traffic lights, where the passing cars crush the nuts and the crows cross safely with the pedestrians to retrieve their meal. I was in awe, and suddenly their calls became orchestral, and we ate cherries together happily ever after, in part because they had indeed moved into my backyard, and in part because crows remember faces, and I could not risk retaliation if they were to be slighted. So in this case, it was easy for me to shift the crow from pest to partner. And my provocation to you tonight is, would you also try to change, interrupt, disrupt, undo how you experience or will live with your second or problem creature? Because this story needs to be co-authored by all of us. The personal experience in order to capture the poetic imagination for biophilic cities and enriched landscapes for human, non-human ecologies, which in turn provoke a politicized collective action in areas where the neighborhood wild and humans are more and more encroaching on each other's territories. Thank you.